All right, the next part of the lesson, we're going to talk about standard form and then x and y intercepts. So for a linear equation, a standard form is going to look like this. So ax plus by equals c. Okay? So here, our a, b, and c values are integers. So again, we need to think back and look and remember what an integer is. So integers are positive and negative whole numbers, including 0. So that means that a and b have to be whole numbers. Okay? Now, it's okay if they're positive or negative, that part doesn't matter, but they are adding one more clarification for standard form, and we always want a to be positive. So whatever number is in front of x, that number has to be positive. For b and c, it doesn't matter if they're positive or negative. Okay? So again, all whole numbers, so that means no fractions or decimals. A has to be positive, and then if we're also looking at this, x and y need to be on the same side before we can consider it to be in standard form. Now, an x-intercept is the point where a graph crosses our x-axis. Okay, so it's the point that's crossing the x-axis. So if we draw a graph here, let me use a different color. So let's say we have a graph. So here's a linear graph. This part right here, this would be our x-intercept, because that's where it's crossing the x-axis. So at this point, we know that we're going to have some number, so whatever that number is crossing the x-axis, and then our y value has to be 0. So if we have an equation and we're trying to find our x-intercept, we can substitute 0 in for a y, and then simplify that to find our x. So solve it to find x. And then the y-intercept is where it's crossing the y-axis, so that's going to be here. So that's our y-intercept. So again, when we're looking at this, our x value has to be 0 this time, and then our y value would be wherever it's crossing the y-axis. So that gives us this. So again, if we know what our equation is to find this, we could substitute 0 in for x, and then we would solve for y. Okay. And if we think back to Algebra 1 and even some geometry, how many points do we need to graph a linear function? And the answer to that is we need 2 points. And from geometry, we know that 2 points define a line. So that's why we only need 2 points. If you want to graph more points, so I believe in Algebra 1 you probably graphed 3, you can still do that. However, in this class, I only require that you graph 2 distinct points. Okay. All right, so let's go on to do some examples. Okay, so writing each equation in standard form, and then we're going to identify our a, b, and c values. So when we're doing this, we have to think about our definition of standard form. So remember, for standard form, we need all whole numbers. Okay, so whole numbers. The x and y have to be on the same side, so x and y on same side. And then x needs to be positive. Okay, so we have to meet those 3 things before we can consider it to be in standard form. All right, so number 7, if we're looking at this, we don't have any fractions to worry about or any decimals, so we already have whole numbers, so that's good. So now I'm going to get x and y on the same side. So that means that we're going to start by subtracting the 3x over. So now we have negative 3x plus y. And remember, if we think back to standard form too, so I'm just going to write it up here. So ax plus by equals c. Our x term is always first. So, and usually when we're dealing with variables, you always write them in alphabetical order. Okay, so x is always first. And then, so now we still have that equal to negative 5. Okay, so now we have x and y are on the same side, all whole numbers, and x has to be positive. Well, here it's negative. So to make it positive, we're just going to multiply everything times negative 1. So now we have 3x minus y equals positive 5. So that's our standard form, where a is 3, b is negative 1, and c is 5. So all of this is our answer. All right, next example. We have y equals 2/5 x plus 1. So just looking at that right away, we have a fraction. So let's start by getting rid of the fraction. So to get rid of a fraction, we need to get rid of the denominator. So we can always multiply by whatever the denominator is. So, and remember, we have to multiply everything by that. So we're going to start by multiplying everything by 5. So when I distribute 5, we have to distribute it to the y, so this is 5y, equals, and then 2/5 times 5. Well, 2 times 5 is 10, and then we would divide by 5 to get 2, so this is now 2x, and then 1 times 5 is 5. All right, next thing I'm going to do is get x and y on the same side. So again, we're going to subtract the 2x. So negative 2x plus 5y equals 5. And then we have to make this positive. So now we're going to multiply everything by a negative 1. So positive 2x minus 5y equals negative 5. And then to identify a, b, and c, a is 2, b is negative 5, and c is also negative 5. So this would be my final answer for this problem. Now, just so you guys know, this isn't the only order that you have to show your work in. If you want, you can start by getting x and y on the same side, and then getting rid of the fraction and making x positive. So it doesn't have to be this in this order. As long as you're getting to the same final answer, that's what I'm looking for. All right, so next thing, so we have y minus 8 equals 2/3 x minus 9. So if we want, we can start by distributing our fraction in, or we could start by just getting rid of the fraction right away. So it just kind of depends on your personal preference. To make it a little bit easier to distribute in, let's just get rid of the fraction right away. So that means that we're going to multiply everything by 3, because that's what the denominator is. So distributing all the way to the y to start with, so 3y. 3 times 8 is going to be a negative 24. Okay, distributing to this one. Now we have to be careful because this is 2/3 times this group times 3. So we only multiply 3 to this first term on the outside of our parentheses. If we multiply to everything inside, we're really multiplying by 3 twice on this side, and we don't want to do that. Okay, so make sure that you're being careful of that and aware. So 2/3 times 3. So we would take 2 times 3 to get 6. 6 divided by 3 is 2. So now this becomes 2 times the quantity of x minus 9. Okay. So now we can work on distributing in. So 3y minus 24 equals 2x minus 18. And then we want x and y on the same side, numbers on the other, so I'm going to subtract 2x and x. And at the same time, I'm also going to add this 24 to both sides. So that will kind of save us a step here. So when we're looking at this, we can't combine the x and the y together. So we're just going to write that out horizontally. So negative 2x plus 3y. That cancels, so equals, that one's canceled. And then negative 18 plus 24 is going to give us 6. And it's a positive since 24 is bigger. And then x is negative, so that means I got to multiply everything by a negative 1. So now we have positive 2x minus 3y equals negative 6. So A is 2, B is negative 3, and C is negative 6. And this is going to be our final answer. All right, last example of writing it into standard form. So we have 2 fractions this time that we have to deal with. So for these kind of problems, if it's easier for you, you can get rid of the fraction in steps, or you can do it all at once. So it's really whatever your preference is. So typically I like to do it just in one step. So to decide what we have to multiply by, we want to look at our denominators. So between 2 and 4, we would have to figure out what we multiply to get rid of both. So we are finding a common denominator, essentially, between the 2 and the 4. So that one's easy. Common denominator between 2 and 4 is 4. So that's what we're going to multiply everything by. Okay. So 2 multiplied all the way to the 1/2. So we would have 1 times 4, which is 4, divided by 2. So that gives us 2y equals. Okay, next one. So 3 times 4 is 12, divided by 4 is 3. So this is 3x. 2 times 4 is 8. All right, so again, getting x's and y's on the same side. So I'm going to subtract my 3x over. So negative 3x plus 2y equals 8. Times everything by negative 1. Positive 3x minus 2y equals negative 8. So again, A is 3, B is negative 2, C is negative 8. Final answer. And again, guys, make sure that you are clearly identifying your final answer. A person who's reading through your work should never have to guess what your final answer is. So make sure you're identifying it somehow. So usually circling it or putting a box around it is the easiest way to indicate that. All right, next part, x and y intercepts. So again, we talked about this a little bit. And actually, we're going to wait till the next video because this will take us a little bit because we also have to graph. So I'm going to stop the video here, and then you'll find this in the next video.